Well, Meep, we've been here for 200 cycles. How would you summarize your experience thus far? Well, that's what I'm going to do today. I've played this game now for 200 cycles, and I can say that I've pretty much passed the early game and settling nicely into mid-game, and I kind of want to give you my thoughts here of how the Oxygen Not Included Spaced Out DLC feels as compared to, like, the base game. I'm going to start off by telling you that my thoughts so far are very positive. It's like fine art. So starting off in a fresh biome here, the gameplay felt really kind of unique right off the bat, and that has to do with the way that they set up the initial starting biomes and everything that's around your starter base right there. You kind of have to think a little bit because there's a lot of water, a lot of mud, a lot of polluted oxygen, so it really sets you up early on in the early part of the game to kind of try to clean up your starting biome and kind of be careful about how you manage your water and all of that fun stuff. So the thing about the starting biome is that it really felt quite unique. A lot like I was playing on the Oasis map, where you kind of have a unique condition, and then as you expand out, you are exposed to other unique conditions. One of the main differences is that this biome is actually quite cold as compared to hot that we might have in other biomes. It doesn't mean that it's all that challenging, but one of the main differences is that as we get closer and closer to space, things actually get really, really cold as compared to getting really, really hot, which is a key difference to how this game transitions from early game to mid game, or how you kind of get out of here and start to get into rockets and all of that good stuff. And if we just talk about that transition for a moment, it feels like the transition is no longer about trying to get to a point where your base is stable and then building up lots and lots of industry in order to build enough refined metal and to defend yourself from asteroids. One of the key differences here is that we're not really threatened that much in the starting biome. There's no meteorites or anything like that. Our biggest threat has to do with cold temperatures here, and how do you get through that, and then how do you deal with the vacuum of space? That way you can kind of go out and then explore different planets, which is totally different. And these are where they're going to have unique challenges. And I'm starting to bump up against the points where there's certain things that are not yet implemented in the game. But for example, this might be one such biome that you visit right after your initial biome here, and you do start to deal with the opposite effects. Instead of dealing with cold temperatures, now you're going to start to deal with hotter temperatures. You can see down here, we're starting to get to the point where we need atmo suits or different environmental protection measures in order to make the dupes survive and thrive within these environments. So it feels like the key difference between the DLC and kind of the base game is that it's less about industry and more about environmental protection and how you overcome the new obstacles that you're going to be facing as you explore different planets. So one of the things that I'm probably going to be exposed to here fairly soon is radiation that comes off of this radium material and, the different environmental effects that aren't quite implemented into the game just yet. I'm starting to bump up against that. But you can understand that the environment itself is hazardous to my dupes. So I got to think of how I'm going to overcome that. So it's less about producing boatloads of steel, but more about how do you survive in new environments. So the really cool thing about that right there is as we expand out into kind of the whole star map and end up on more and more planets, we have more and more things to look at and overcome. So you have a lot more stuff to do. So I think rather than the game stalling out in mid-game and you kind of just have to get through that in order to get into space, at this point there's so many different things to do. I'm kind of facing the dilemma of, okay, what things do I actually focus on? How best am I going to interact with this planet? What's going to leave here? What's going to stay here? How do I ship this from colony to colony sort of thing? It's really, really interesting. Well, I'm already off my notes. Let me get back on these. Let's talk about the new critters. There's 3 of them that I've dealt with and 1 that I have yet to deal with thus far. So the bees I have yet to deal with, but the plug slugs, sweetles, and grubs I've all dealt with thus far, and they're actually really interesting because they are different than any of the critters that we've dealt with before. If we talk about the plug slugs right here, they've kind of been a topic of a lot of debate thus far, in that when they sleep, they give off power. Early on in the game, this is a great source of power and kind of alleviates your need to build up a lot of power right off the bat. If you can keep your base efficient, then you don't have to worry about it quite as much. Obviously, once you get towards mid-game where I'm at right now, and you're running things like incubators that suck down a lot of power, that's when we start to deal with solar, or coal generators, or what other kind of generators we want to set up because we can bring resources from other planets, right? Those are take a little bit more to set up. However, right now the plug slugs are going through a couple of changes. It's the amount of power they output has to do with how many calories they consume, and they do consume ore. And I think right now they're kind of a weird critter. They don't really seem to have a place past early game. I kind of feel like they're missing an evolution to where you can feed them a refined metal or something like that that's a little bit more sustainable. As it is right now, if you harvest or if you try to raise a bunch of plug slugs for the sake of food or something like that, it seems like they're going to eat up a lot of your resources. But then again, all of the critters you're dealing with in this DLC consume fairly critical resources. So the Sweetles over here, they consume sulfur. Same thing with the grubs down here. They can actually consume a couple of things, sucrose or sulfur as well. And sulfur is an interesting thing to be feeding your critters because it's a limited quantity thing on your map, right? We have a little bit of sulfur over here that we can dig up, but once we run out of it, we kind of run out of a food source for our critters. It's also a food source for the grub fruit plants over here. Here's the other interesting thing about these critters, is that they are worth quite a bit of food, or at least the grubs are. So they're very, very valuable for their meat. They also put a bonus on the plants themselves, the grub, which will improve its farming rate by 50%, which is pretty awesome. So you can use these things to really accelerate the amount of food you're producing early on in the game. You can build up a lot of food very, very quickly, which will help you get food to other asteroids and whatnot. However, the fact that it deals with sulfur, I think, is really, really interesting because it's available early on right here, so long as we have it available on our map. But once we dig it up, we then need to create more of it, which really becomes kind of an end game goal, like really, really end game. For those of you that are familiar with sour gas boilers and whatnot, we noticed that sulfur was one of the byproducts coming off of that whole big process of working with natural gas and petroleums and whatnot. Producing sulfur, I think, is the end game goal to the very, very long game sustainability of things like grubs and the plants that then rely on that, which I think is really quite interesting. So there's something that you're dealing with that you have early on, but in order to maintain it long term, but you're gonna have to go very, very far out into space in order to make it sustainable. So the other half of this is the fact that the Sweetles are giving off sucrose, which is our rocket fuel for our, well, if we were to build the correct engine up here. So let me go ahead and just change this real quick to sugar engine. And then I think you need an oxidizer tank on top of that because sugar is your solid fuel and then you need an oxidizer to go with it. Something like that. But if we take a look at the rockets real quick here, I think the rockets are really interesting. You saw how I was able to change this, add sections, remove sections. I find that so refreshing as compared to what we had in the base game. Being able to kind of go over there, not really mess with the doors and all that stuff, and the fact that we can queue up the whole thing and kind of add sections, remove sections, super, super nice. I love the changes that they've made to the rockets. They're so much more approachable and so much more interesting. Probably the most interesting dynamic of the rockets here has to do with the interior views of them. So inside of here, you can see that we have various environments that our duplicants are then inside of as they're flying around in the star map. So this one's fairly small, as you can imagine. There's not a lot inside of here. We mostly just give it a little bit of food, a little bit of oxygen, and send them on their way. But the larger biome over here, people have really gone and done a lot with already. Because it's big enough inside of here in order to build up a fairly sustainable living environment for a decent amount of time. So that's an interesting mid-game thing that pops up once you've unlocked this tech. It's almost like once you've built this, you can kind of just pause the game and start to think, how do you want to design the inside of your rockets so that you can use them to go from place to place and your little rocket pilots are going to be happy. So the cool thing about these rockets is that it's really easy to kind of set up a design and then share it with other people. I think this gets people talking, and I think that's really, really cool. You can see here that I'm using Sweetles inside of here. I've decided to theme my different rockets with different critters. We've got Sweetles, Deliveries, and the Space Slug Alliance. I can imagine that as we get further and further into this game, I'm going to have many more rocket platforms here that'll be going off and doing all sorts of different things, delivering stuff to different planets and all that great stuff. If there's one thing that I would mention about space in its current form right now that I think is a little bit too easy, is how easy it was to build solar panels. As much as I like it, one of the key things that's available to us is a fair amount of glass right here. Now, don't get me wrong, the window tiles are one thing, but if you can deconstruct these windows back here at 400 kilograms each, it's almost like you don't even need to make glass. Now, maybe that's intentional on Sludgax or your initial base right here, but there's a lot of glass available to you if you just use the deconstruct tool. It almost seems like there's a bit too much available. But if I do some quick math, well, we have over 11 tons available. You know what would also look really cool back here? Some wallpaper. You know what? And if wallpaper didn't really affect the gas temperature, it just didn't have a temperature, man, that would be real nice. Because then it wouldn't be real demanding to build wallpaper and you could cover up nasty wires and stuff. Just a thought, just putting it out there. Think about it. Wallpaper's amazing. Speaking of performance, wow, does this game run good all of a sudden? Like, I take it that I'm not maybe doing as much as I used to do in other maps, but this is at fast speed right here. I'm still doing 50 frames per second, okay? Now, I will say that I'm not able to zoom out as far as I normally zoom out, and that tends to have quite an effect on the frames. But in general, this game is running quite a bit smoother than I was expecting, especially considering that I do have stuff going on in other planets. It's not like I only have one space going on. All of these are simultaneously happening at the same time. But I've got stuff going on over here as well. Again, maybe not quite as much as I need, but still. Well, I can't necessarily say that this game is on the same level as some of my bigger maps. I can tell you right now that the frame rate is working really, really good, which I think is quite positive. And the other neat thing is that we can now save games to the cloud, which may seem like a small thing, but for somebody like me who enjoys getting away from this, my same desk and possibly enjoying this on like a laptop or something, just being able to load up the same game from 2 different computers is a super nice thing. I think that's available for everybody, actually, as of now, if you want to do it. For me, I think that's a real nice to have, and it might really change how much I'm able to play the game, as I might be able to kind of, I don't know, take it with me a little bit more than I used to be able to do. Talking about the UI though, man, there's been some nice updates. I know, all I'm saying is nice things. I'll get into some negatives, don't worry. But the UI stuff, look at this. We can type in Oxalide or whatever and just track down different items, how many items we have in the base. Super nice changes. I really, really do like this. This is super handy like that. Oh, nice. If there's one thing that I would like here, I'd like to be able to change the name of my spaceships. Like, I don't know how I can do that. I can change what landing spot they have, but I can't change the name of the rockets. I'd like to name my rocket. All right, so I've drooled over this enough. What are some things that aren't so good? Well, the one thing that I don't like right now is this oxygen mask thing. For some odd reason, it just isn't clicking for me. I've used it somewhat successfully in various spots, such as this one right over here, right? You can see that I have an oxygen diffuser right over here, and that's right next to the oxygen mask. And for the most part, this is actually working out. My dupe can go through here, put on their little mask, and then head over here and use the telescope. I think the 2 issues I have with the oxygen mask as it currently is I feel like it needs to hold a lot of oxygen. I mean, look at that. That's 225 kilograms. And then the mask that they put on lasts a very long time. I kind of feel like it's almost unnecessary. Like, it should almost be like a 1 cycle sort of deal. You put it on, you use it for a bit for whatever that task is they need to do, and then they leave. Because if we take a look at the actual mask that they have on, which I don't know if I can. Let's see here. We'll come back over here, and Bufano will put this back down and kind of just drop it on the ground. Inside of there, it seems like that almost has something like 75 kilograms of oxygen. That's a pretty decent amount of oxygen. That right there is over 1 cycle of oxygen in that little mask, which sort of means you need to pump all of this oxygen back into the mask station, which, as you can see right here, it kind of highlights part of the problem that this thing's doing right now. Since it's pulling in oxygen from around it, it tends to create a vacuum, which has kind of led to overheating problems. I sort of feel like this should just have a gas pipe input if you want to use it, or possibly maybe the masks are holding too much oxygen or something. I don't know. That's my opinion. It's one of these things where I feel like it's close, but it's not quite there yet. I feel like the oxygen mask system is meant to kind of be an early game way to kind of get access to areas with less oxygen. However, I feel like I almost have to build an entire oxygen system just to use the thing, and when I go to use it, it's a fair bit slower than what I was expecting. I ended up not using it in my base game, even after they kind of modded it and changed it a little bit. So either A, I'm not using it correctly, or it's currently a bit too slow to be useful. If I were to have another nitpick here, I would have to poke some fun at the rockets. So right now, all of these rockets are looking nice and, you know, they fit. And then we have this one, which is just like, bleh. You know, it's obviously looking a little weird. So what I think is happening here, at least with the rockets, is that I'm bumping up against what's just not in the game currently. I'm thinking there's going to be more engines, which we know already exist in the base game, but they're not available here, which might be just wider, larger, and able to push larger and larger rockets. So here's another thing. I'm trying to deliver some oxalite to this right now. It's not telling me that it isn't accessible. There's no sort of inputs, so I'm thinking it's a dupe delivered sort of thing. There we go. See, it was undeliverable, but it didn't show up right there. So there's some rough parts around the rockets. I just don't think they're fully implemented thus far. So those are the little things I'm running into. The difference between being able to deliver this and not deliver to this was one chunk of ladder right there, which is sort of counterintuitive that I need a piece of ladder right there when the rocket's possibly this large. I kind of feel like the ladder should only have to come over to here so that you can get to it. If there was one more nitpick I'd have on the rockets right now, is that it does give me the most important detail, and that is rocket range remaining 2 tiles. But then there's all these different numbers down here: the total rocket burden, the power, the fuel remaining. How we're going from here to there really isn't all that clear. So if I'm trying to specifically build a rocket to go a certain range, how do I know what I need to know in order to get there? Unless I kind of reverse engineer this or dig into some other tutorials or something like that. I feel like there could be a bit more detail underneath this Rocketry tab right here. So there you have it. A lot of thoughts kind of vomited at the screen. I don't know if they made sense, but in general, what are my overall takeaways from the DLC right now as compared to the base game? Well, I'm just going to tell you right now, I enjoy this more than I enjoy the base game. And it isn't so much that I've just been playing the base game for a very long time or something like that. In general, I feel like there's a lot more going on. It's a more interactive experience than the base game was initially. And I think it all has to do with how we transition out of the early game into the mid game when we're dealing with all of these different planets and all of these different environments right here, and the things that I will soon be discovering and possibly dealing with once they implement it, such as radiation down here and the different environmental protections that go into, you know, taming something like that. Not only that, I know that there's much more serious planetoids than this one right here that do exist somewhere out there. But you have to go and you have to jump on the little space scanner thing and take a look around. And they've also kind of ironed out some of the pain points that I used to have with the base version of the game, such as dealing with the telescopes. Those were always kind of a little bit annoying. And the fact that you had to build up all of this structure just to kind of protect it. The various game mechanics, such as being able to teleport things from one planetoid to the other, move them back and forth and trying to figure out how everything works together, is super interactive. And that's just awesome. And the fact that you have rockets that can ship things around, and like the space rovers, these little guys, and the little space robots that you can send ahead to build up your own little environments before your dupes get there. I mean, that's just the coolest game mechanic ever. Honestly, the DLC, I'm just going to say it right now, is a better game than the base game is currently. Personally, that's just my opinion. I'm looking forward to playing a lot more of it, and I'm also looking forward to seeing what they unveil next when it comes to radiation and all of that sort of high-end endgame content. So thus far, I am a big fan of the spaced out DLC, and I'm very much looking forward to the next several hundred cycles inside of my little base right here. One final thing I want to talk about here is that I don't think it would take an experienced player with the intention of making progress in the game 200 cycles to get to where I'm currently at in the game. I think you could do it in anywhere from about 100 up to 200 or so. I tend to play the game a little bit slower and try to focus on various stories that tends to slow me down overall. I think what you're seeing here could be done in less than the amount of time that I have played the game, for sure. It almost feels like we're getting to the point where your ability to make decisions and lay out plans might be the limiting factor as compared to how quickly your dupes can do it and all the things that are going on. So And that's an interesting change as compared to kind of the base game, once you kind of get to that mid-game hump where you're trying to plan a bunch of things out and then you're kind of waiting for your dupes to chew through all of your commands. Then again, I play the game a fair bit different than most people, so I don't know. Make of that what you will. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts. I'm enjoying the game, and I'm looking forward to many, many more cycles. At any rate, that's all I got time for today. Have a great day, guys. Stay awesome. Peace. Brothgar out.